Here to prove laughter is truly the best medicine. For your enjoyment, please welcome outstanding Australian cartoonist Johannes with Fred Pawle.
Mate,
Here we
how
are.
good is this?
It's great.
Just for context, when I first met Johannes almost 30 years ago, we were just a couple of surf rats, and all we wanted to do was surf the rest of our lives, and the only thing we wanted to talk about was which professional Australian surfer could ever beat Kelly Slater. And we didn't surf the rest of our lives away, and no, not many Australian surfers have beaten Kelly Slater since then either. So one of the reasons we're up here now is that those days were just a whole lot more carefree. I mean, we were carefree, but Australia was a different place then. And I think that's why we're here today, because we want to take Australia back to where it used to be. Specifically, we are here to talk about the great Bill Leak, the cartoonist for The Australian, who was... Yes! Thank you. He was, as it happens, my best mate for 23 years, and he was Johannes' dad. Johannes has since filled his shoes at The Australian, but first thing I want to acknowledge is that Bill was 61 when he died in 2017, and he was taken from us too soon. But, you know, he was taken from the country, he was taken from me as a mate, but more significantly, he was taken from Johannes, who was his son. So I just want to acknowledge, mate, it takes a lot of guts to... It was only 5 years ago, and I'm sure it's still, you know, it's still difficult for you.
Thanks. Thanks.
So anyway, at the Welcome to Country earlier, I noticed that the guy said at the end of his little speech, Bill adored our Indigenous heritage and our Indigenous brothers and sisters, but when that guy said, at the end, he said, travel safely and tread lightly. And I was thinking, geez, if Bill was here, he would have leaned into my ear and said, that's bullshit, Fredo. Travel unsafely and tread bloody heavily. And that's why we're here today, because he left a hell of a legacy. I wanted to start with just, you know, with something funny that he said. He was funny, you know, every minute of every day. But and most of the jokes that he shared with us couldn't be repeated in polite company anyway. But I do recall one day I arrived at The Australian in 1997. It was a Sunday, and there'd been a very dramatic incident in Paris the night before, the news of which had broken around mid-morning at The Australian, and the newsroom was in absolute turmoil to clear as many pages as possible to cover this event. It was, you may recall, a fairly significant moment when Princess Diana was killed in a car chase in Paris. Anyway, journalists were scrambling to get stories to fill these pages, because it was virtually going to be the Princess Diana Memorial Edition the next day. And everyone was just scrambling to get a story, like, you know, what coloured socks was she wearing, and what did she have for breakfast that morning? And Bill and I were both very amused by this, because neither of us rated, you know, apologies to anyone who did admire Lady Diana, but we didn't think too highly of her. And Bill came up to me and goes, mate, I've got the headline for tomorrow's paper, front page. I go, oh, what's that, Bill? He goes, car crash in Paris, thousands inconvenienced. Anyway, one of the things about Bill was, you know, one of the things that I think a lot of people knew, but a lot of people here wouldn't have known because they wouldn't have met him. Bill had an extraordinary gift for friendship. And that was an extension of just how egalitarian he was. But I just want to ask you, Johannes, what was he like as a dad?
Thanks, Fred. He was a beautiful dad. He was caring and unashamedly affectionate at times, supportive, encouraging, he just wanted the best for my brother and I. And then later when he married Gung, he took a really keen interest in Tasha's development, her education. I mean, he was such a creative person, such an enthusiastic person. I think he instilled in us an interest in music, interest in art, books. He shared all.
He was a
these
force
things
of
with us.
nature, wasn't he?
Yeah, he really was a force of
But
nature.
as a little kid, what was it like to be under that force of nature?
Well, of course, I don't have a comparison, but I mean, I think maybe he's the only father I knew, but maybe it's, and so for me this is normal, but he was an inspiring figure as a dad. I mean, I still think about, what my dad would say, how he would respond to things, what he would think of certain things that are happening, and it's always with me, I suppose, because I just adored him and looked up to him so much.
But he was an incredibly encouraging person. Even it's human nature for people to, especially successful people, to resent other people's success. I mean, no one admits to it, but we all do feel it in one way or another. But I can happily say that Bill was so extraordinarily talented in so many different ways. He could play piano like Randy Newman. He could paint like Rembrandt. He could write like Woody Allen, and he could deliver speeches like Paul Keating. But all I ever saw, I never once saw him be pretentious about that or be anything less than encouraging about every person he met. And I think he felt that about the country in general, really, didn't he?
Yeah, and I think that came from his upbringing. I mean, he was a boy from the bush, born in a tiny little country town in country Victoria, a place called Garoke. Then they moved to the big smoke of Condobolin, and wound up in Sydney. But I think he grew up with a sort of a deep awareness and understanding of what it means to be, an ordinary Aussie. He loved ordinary Australians. He didn't think of him as being above anybody. He looked everybody in the eye and didn't ever want to sort of separate himself from others in that way. Just because he was became a famous cartoonist and a famous artist and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think it was very important just to connect with ordinary people.
Well, most people know him because of his later work, and I took a few years off to write the biography of Bill, which signed copies are available in the foyer if anyone's interested. But during that time, being a writer is a very isolating experience, but occasionally when I found myself in a social situation, people go, "Oh, what are you doing?" I go, "Well, I'm writing a biography." And they go, "Oh, who of?" And I go, "Oh, well, Bill Leake." And they go, invariably, they would say, "Oh, isn't he that racist cartoonist?" Which it never failed to rankle because, as Johannes and I both know, and anyone who ever met him knows, he was the least racist person who could have possibly existed. When the book was finished, I sent 6 copies of it to the ABC, hoping that someone would use it as a doorstop. But there are actually 4 prominent presenters from the ABC who are mentioned in the book. And I thought, oh, God, at least one of them's going to get me on to talk about it. But no, the switchboard did not light up with a call, and God knows what happened to those books. But Johannes, how did Bill's character get so badly mistaken?
Well, I think it was a concerted effort or a deliberate effort to misinterpret messages, in particular the message in one particular cartoon, which has since become very well known. But Jacinta and Warren and Anthony talked about this earlier. They envision an Australia where we look beyond skin colour to address issues, but we're not using skin colour as an excuse or. My dad saw an issue that's caused him great despair and should cause us all great despair. But he didn't feel like because he was a white bloke, he couldn't make a comment about it, and he couldn't make a hard-hitting comment about it. And he had the courage to make a hard-hitting comment, and an uproar, a backlash sort of ensued. But I think a lot of it was, the word racism was thrown around as a sort of weapon to silence him, and I think that happens all the time.
When I was writing the book, some of the letters he wrote as a young man back to his family were entrusted to me, and they were an enormous help in writing the book. And I just want to read a quote from one of them. This is Bill Leake at the age of 22 writing to his family from Germany. Quote, one of the great strengths of Australia is experienced in the way people say, "Oh, bullshit," to everything. As long as people keep recognising and calling out bullshit over there, everything will be all right. Now, I quote that twice in the book for two reasons. One is that Bill was so, even at the age of 22, he was so sort of obsessed with the concept of the truth. But the other reason is that inadvertently he proved to be right, because we've stopped calling out bullshit and everything is not all right. So talk us through what it was like. Let's talk about you now, Johannes. I mean, calling out bullshit is an extremely dangerous occupation these days. It was dangerous for Bill. It's probably even more dangerous for you.
Yeah. I mean, but first I'd like to say it is an amazing quote, because at that time he thought he'd be chiefly a portrait painter or realist painter. He didn't know at that stage he was going to be a great cartoonist. But it reads like the mission statement for any cartoonist. Yeah. Call out bullshit when you see it. But these days I suppose it's a social media world, and the drawback to that, of course, is that people can immediately respond and voice their outrage. They're looking for outrage, and then they that's where they express it on social media. So, of course, that's something that you have to steel yourself against. But really, we're cartoonists, and the job of a cartoonist is to stir the pot. You actually don't want to confirm people's prejudices. You want to challenge them, and you want to get a reaction. And this is the thing: what they sort of fail to realise is the more upset and hot under the collar they get, the better a cartoonist often feels.
Yeah. Well done. The other thing in Bill's life was, I mean, he didn't just pursue sort of humour and the truth through his cartooning, but as an artist, he really did pursue beauty more than anyone I've ever met. And I think, I think if he was here today, he would say, all this freedom that we're defending is meaningless if we don't also pursue beauty, don't you think?
Yeah, he did, and he despaired about the trajectory of art from, it used to be about creating pictures and beautiful things, and these days, if you go into a contemporary art gallery, you're more likely to be shocked, or you're supposed to be educated, and every so-called artwork comes with a list of instructions on how to understand it, because you wouldn't understand it just by looking at it. So to Dad, art, when he first stumbled across art, I think as a boy who found a book of Norman Lindsay etchings in a shearer's shed somewhere, that sort of grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, and it never left him. It was he saw there firsthand that human beings are capable of the most incredibly beautiful things when you work hard and put your mind to it. But for my dad, and I suppose to artists with a sort of conservative outlook, they've sort of thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and these days it's all political messaging. It's largely activism masquerading as art, and the beauty is gone, and it's actually been under attack for a long time. The tradition of learning how to draw, the traditions of truly learning how to paint, they've been under attack for a long time. They've been completely undermined. But to some of us, they still matter, and they will keep coming back. And there's nothing wrong with liking that sort of work or wanting to do that kind of work.
Well, he was vilified for essentially telling the truth, but he spent his life in defending what you say are not necessarily conservative values, just traditional, decent Australian values. What do they mean? What were they?
Look, I think he grew up with just a real sense of treating everybody fairly, everybody decently, not making judgments about them. He believed in outdated concepts like freedom and the family unit. And I think he over time became acutely aware of the march of the left towards to the progressive fringes, and what he hated above all else was people sort of waving their finger at him and telling him what to do. I mean, he hated the nanny state. He believed in personal responsibility and the freedom to go and do what you want to do without being hectored by others. And as a cartoonist, I suppose he was on the front line, possibly before a lot of other people kind of woke up to what was going on. He was feeling it because of the response to him just going about his job. Suddenly the things that he'd said a few years back, which hadn't got him into any trouble, were getting him into trouble. So he felt that something was changing. So he was also, he was just a born contrarian and a born nonconformist. And I think he resisted labels to some extent, but I think he would have said, if the people here are for ideas like freedom and personal responsibility and they're not buying into the climate hysteria, all that sort of stuff, he would have said, if that makes me a conservative, then so be it.
So be it.
That's right.
In his lifetime, he saw us stop calling out bullshit. He saw us lose our sense of humour, largely, and he saw the left, as Johannes just so eloquently explained, undermine the pursuit of beauty. And if he was here today, he'd say, keep up the fight. Thank you.
Thank you.